So, it's been a while. I haven't made any videos in a few days, and I haven't made a Tokyo Ghoul video in over a month, at least a legitimate Tokyo Ghoul video, not me talking about my fan fiction, but making a legitimate TG video. It's been quite a bit of time, and I do want to talk about TG a little bit more because it was a big part of my life, especially with my former channel. But I thought since it was indeed Mother's Day, that this might be the time I make my comeback with a more smaller scale video, especially when it comes to the topic of this video and what exactly it's supposed to represent, which is focusing upon the mothers of the Tokyo Ghoul story, what exactly they represent, and what have every single one of them done to create some type of lasting impact within the Tokyo Ghoul story. Now, I am going to be mainly focusing on 4 different mothers. There will be a 5th one that I will kind of leave to the end, but that's more of a recent mother, and we haven't really seen them do a whole lot when it comes to their character as of this point in the current story of Tokyo Ghoul, which is obviously the epilogue. So yeah. But when it comes to the mothers that I'm going to be focusing on, the main 4, I think, have had the biggest impact on the story through either direct or indirect ways, is Ukina, which is Eto's mother, Kaneki's mother, which she's unnamed, Toka's mother, Hikari, as well as Hinami's mother, Ryoko. Because even though most of them haven't really played a super big role when it comes to impacting the overall story, they have kind of caused certain events that have driven characters to have specific motives or act in a specific way throughout the course of the rest of the story, even though most of them ended up or being showcased with their type of sacrifice. So like I said before, every single one of these mothers falls along the lines of some type of sacrifice, at least initially. Now, the only one who doesn't follow under that same suit is Kaneki's mother, especially after finding out the truth about her. But when we first find out about her and her relationship to Kaneki and the way how she sculpted him, she did fall in line with the rest of this theme. Now, going back to what I was saying before, mothers in general are usually the person who cultivates you and raises you at least the most in your life. Now, even though your father a lot of the time kind of shows you some type of truth about the world, I always felt like that mothers kind of held the more nurturing approach when it comes to raising their children. It's usually their values that are instilled upon you and force you forward in order to become better people or walk along the line of their same path that they're willing to follow if we're going an anime type approach. And those traits actually are instilled pretty well when it comes to the characters that are affected most by their mothers within the Tokyo Ghoul story. You actually have where Kaneki follows the same guidelines that his mother set for him, at least his interpretation of her. Where for the longest time, until he became white-haired Kaneki, he followed the mindset of it's better to be hurt than hurt others. Eventually, Kaneki ended up breaking this code, realizing that a lifestyle or some type of life viewing like that wouldn't work within the world that he currently lives in, and sometimes you kind of have to accept that you have to become some type of monster in order to just simply survive and make sure the people around you survive as well. Now, these life values are also instilled when it comes to the characters of both Toka and Hinami, where they both follow a very similar mindset to the way how their mothers have lived, where Hinami doesn't really blame the world for the way how things are, or even blame the people that are in it. She takes full-on responsibility for everything that happens and simply just decides to live in that world and keep on pushing forward, even though it might bring great pain to her. It's because of that mindset that I actually really like Hinami as a character, and it's just very interesting to see how selfless she is compared to several other people in TG, where they're willing to place the blame upon other different people or other things for the reason the world is the way how it is, instead of either taking the blame themselves or simply not blaming anybody. Now, as we do know, Ryoko always, at least for the most part, was kind of demonstrated as a very kind person. At least when you're watching the anime or reading the manga, she was always kind of displayed, and she's even introduced as one of the few ghouls that don't go out of their way to hunt in order to feed themselves. she actually goes to Ontaku in order to be supplied with food, and she lives relatively not that much different than an ordinary human and has mannerisms very similar to other humans. In fact, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them until you see her Kakugan and her Kagane. And one thing about Ryoko that I always found very interesting, especially in contrast to her daughter, is the fact that they carry very, very similar mindsets, where Ryoko and Hinami usually won't fight until provoked, and the situation actually calls for it, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves so other people can get away and they can continue to survive. We see this in the case of when Ryoko ends up being killed by Mato and Amon back in the very beginning of the Tokyo Ghoul series, I believe in Volume 2, where she's willing to fight, even though she's not really a combative character, in order for her daughter to escape and survive and not get killed by the doves. And you have where Hinami does something very similar around the near end of the TG series, where she's willing to sacrifice herself so Toka, as well as the rest of the children and other people within the 24th Ward, to escape and they can survive, so her life would be paid as tribute. Now, obviously, Hinami didn't end up dying, but it's the thoughts that counts. She was intending to die in that situation and hold off Suzy as long as she possibly could, fully knowing that she was walking into a scenario that she most likely wouldn't come out victorious, very similar to the way how her mother did a long time ago. Toka, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily pay tribute to her mother the same exact way how Hinami does, where she follows the same guidelines and views that her mother instilled upon her. Toka's relationship with her mother is actually left very unclear, and even though we do know, based off of very small intervals of flashbacks from Yomo's point of view about Hikari, that she cared about Toka deeply, Toka and Ayato, we do know for a fact that, according to Yomo, even Ayato, and even Arata, that Toka actually is very similar to her mother in multiple different ways, in terms of personality, of having a very tomboyish personality, in the fact that she was very, I don't want to say angsty, but very, I guess, rebellious when she was in her teen years, and then she eventually ended up calming down and mellowing out quite a bit in her later years, which all the Kirishimas, or that family, I suppose, since there isn't really a proper name to call them, kind of seem to all fall in line with that, with Hikari, Yomo, Toka, and Ayato. And in fact, I wouldn't even be surprised if Ichika ends up falling in a very similar phase to that, just like the rest of the people in her family. But going back to what I was saying before, we know that Toka holds a very strong resemblance to her mother in both personality and physically, which makes me wonder if that was something that was intentional, or if it was something that just happened to be based off of nature. But I would imagine that since Toka does hold a very strong, I don't want to say bond, but feelings towards her father, and even though we haven't really seen too much of the relationship between Toka and her mother with her talking about her, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the teachings that her mother ended up passing upon her ended up being passed down to Toka in some type of capacity, where either it's some type of suppressed memory that she doesn't inherently remember but she still follows behind, or something along the lines of it's just something that she still lives by, and those words is the closest thing that she has left to the mindset that her mother carried. But for the most part, Toka kind of follows along the lines of the way how her father acted than her mother, at least in terms of life views, which I can't imagine that Hikari's and Arata's were really that much different, since we don't know a whole lot about Hikari as a character. But either way, moving on to the next one, being Ukina, the relationship between Eto and her mother has always been a very interesting one. It's one that's not really played upon too much, and it's kind of showcased very subtly throughout the course of the Tokyo Ghoul story. But most of the relationship that we see between Eto and her mother is displayed through Eto vaguely talking about the diaries that her mother left for her. Now, since we do know a little bit of the details within those diaries, I'm assuming it's what caused Eto to feel the type of way and even be able to recognize who her father is when it came to, in the case of Yoshimura. Now, as we do know, apparently Ukina wrote in her diaries the events of her relationship with Yoshimura you know, or being aware that he was a member of V and all that different stuff, which eventually led to Yoshimura taking her life, or in the anime interpretation, V killing her, which is probably the main reason for driving Eto to live the life that the way she did, aside from her just having a very like rough lifestyle growing up, in the case of like assuming living with Yomo and eventually forming Aogiri and all that different stuff. But when it comes to her goal of taking down V, I've always felt like that was mostly instilled from the life that she ended up growing up, as well as the diaries that her mother left for her. There's probably a lot of different things that obviously we aren't aware of that her mother probably wrote down that kind of instilled, like, if you manage to grow up and I'm not around, because I am living kind of a very risky life where I'm essentially Yoshimura and Ukina were kind of on the run. This is what I want you to do. And I feel like Ukina, despite her playing a very insignificant role within the main continuity, or not the main continuity, but like the main story, I suppose, she almost has the biggest long-lasting value when it comes to TG, especially when it comes to, I guess, starting the overall process of breaking down the birdcage, which seems to even be a process that Eto wasn't necessarily following immediately. It didn't seem like this overall plan was completely forged until Arima was willing to help her, which I would really like to get some type of light novel or side story focused upon that. But based off of the way how Suichi is acting and some of the stuff that he said on Twitter, as well as in his in the last volume of TG, it seems like his interest in Tokyo Ghoul isn't necessarily where it used to be, so I don't think we would get a side story written by him, but I would like to see a light novel focused around Arima and Eto, and maybe the first time they first met each other, and all that different stuff. And I think a light novel just centered around Eto or V in general would be phenomenal, but either way, I digress. So I feel like Ukina, compared to the other mothers that I have listed so far, she's kind of had the most long-lasting value to the overall story when it comes to impact and just setting things in place and pushing them forward for the way how they are supposed to be. Now, going back to Kaneki's mother, because I kind of wanted to talk about her briefly in the beginning before I dive into her now. Now, like I said before, Kaneki's mother doesn't fully follow behind the whole sacrificial theme that Toka's mother and Hinami's and the other mothers all follow. Where Kaneki's mother initially, from what we were introduced, that she died because she overworked herself so that her sister can live a decent life, and she was pretty much working for herself as well as for her sister in order to pay a bunch of things off, and then she pretty much died because of overexhaustion. And for what we know as of right now, that's the only reason why she died. There have been theories that Kaneki was the one who killed her and all that different stuff. We don't really know as of right now. We don't have a clear-cut answer as of right now. All we know is that Kaneki's mother died because of overexhaustion, apparently, from overworking herself. And unlike Hinami's mother, who sacrificed her life for her child, and Arima killing Hikari, and we don't necessarily know the details of that. All we know is that Arata was there when it happened. And even Ukina, who sort of sacrificed herself, being fully aware of what was going on with Kuzen, and the fact that her child would probably be one of the key players when it comes to creating some type of change within the world. They all follow some type of sacrificial theme until you get till Kaneki's mother, and the true intentions were, I don't want to necessarily say that was retcon, but it was fully clarified to the audience that Kaneki's mother was a very selfish person, and because of the abuse that she brought to him, both verbally as well as physically, and we don't really get to see full-on too many details of that, you can assume that the violent nature that Kaneki carries, at least when he's in his Black Reaper state, is fully instilled from that. And it's because of her teachings, the ones that Kaneki placed upon himself, that he followed, as well as her violent tendencies, is what caused Kaneki to become the way how he is, where he is clearly very depressed, and that's coupled with the fact of the world that he currently lives in. But it's very obvious that when it comes to a lot of the characters in TG who have kind of sculptured Kaneki into the person that he is, being Toka, Eto, Arima, Akira. Eto's mother's definitely up there with some of the people that have kind of placed some type of really big, lasting impact on his life, regardless if it was in a positive with the fake interpretation of his mother within his head, or a negative with the way how she truly was. And it's kind of sad, but I can honestly make an entire video just talking about the relationship between Kaneki and his mother, because there is a lot of different things to talk about, and there's a lot of research that I have to do, especially with the way how Kaneki handles suppressing his memories in that type of way. It's just very sad. But going back to the final mother, Toka. She's the mother of, obviously, Ichika Kaneki. We don't really get to see too much of the relationship between the two of them, but I'm assuming that based off the way how Toka is at that point in time, and the fact that she currently lives in a world that is relatively very peaceful, and I've kind of talked about it before in some of the analysis I've made about Toka over the years, and the fact that Toka's journey throughout the course of Tokyo Ghoul, even though it's a very subtle one, it's based around the fact that she's slowly becoming more human as the story carries along. I'm pretty sure that she's probably going to instill the same teachings that she learned from her father, as well as possibly even the ones that she might have learned from her mother off-screen upon Ichika, and cultivate her into a pretty remarkable woman by the time she's older within the story. And I think Toka is a pretty appealing mother for the very few times that we could see it. It's clear that based on the way how she acts, and the fact that she was fully unwilling to damage her own body just so her child can get the nutrients that she needs, is pretty respectable. And I actually forgot to bring that up when it came to Ukina, where Ukina did the same thing, but in a more, I guess, sort of an opposite way, where Toka had to eat human food in order for their child, or her child, to end up being born and having the nutrients that it needs. And I'm assuming that she probably got some more better alternatives after the events of the Dragon arc, but Ukina had to do the same thing, but since she was a human, she had to eat either, it's kind of left ambiguous, because I believe in the anime and the manga interpretation, what they did was different, where I believe one of them, she was eating herself, in order, like, she was cannibalizing herself in order for Eto to get the nutrients that she needed. And then there's, I believe in a different interpretation, she was just eating human flesh in order to get the nutrients that she needed. So either way, it's pretty bad. You still have to cannibalize, and I'd imagine for anyone that would be an extremely grotesque thing to do. And I remember even seeing the panel where Ukina's literally crying while doing this, because she loves her child so much, and she doesn't want her kid to end up being miscarried, because she wouldn't be able to get the nutrients that she needs in order to survive. So the fact that Toka and Ukina were both able to do something like that and eat something that's completely disgusting to them, in order to have their children live, is pretty respectable. And I feel like even if you don't really like Toka as a character, which I know a lot of people don't, that's enough to commend her for, at least give her that. So yeah, either way, that's kind of all I have for this video. This was just a video I wanted to make very briefly. I'm sorry that's a little bit more off the cuff. I do still plan on making my Kaneki character analysis in the future, and that's going to be probably a lot more scripted, but either way, if you guys want more Tokyo Ghoul content, I haven't talked about TG in a while, and I know a lot of you guys sub to me for Tokyo Ghoul content. Just comment down below, and let me know what videos you guys would want me to talk about. And yeah, so anyways, thanks for watching. Remember to comment, subscribe as always, guys. I love you all. Jalen Hawk signing out. See you guys. Bye.